Well, welcome to Round the Table with Christian Concern. It's great to see you. And today we're asking the question, can a 6-year-old really be transphobic? And I'm delighted to be joined today by special guests, Nigel and Sally Rowe, who have been battling for 4 years plus around this whole issue and had an incident in their school, which we'll get to in a minute, where their 6-year-old child was accused of being transphobic. And we're also joined today by Libby Littlewood, who is transgender. I'm sure she'd rather be identified as a lovely woman than that today. And but she brings that perspective as well on this whole subject. So Nigel and Sally, can you just talk us through what happened? It was about 4 years ago, wasn't it? And one of your son's 6-year-old. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so for us, we've got 2 sons, and we're in a Church of England primary school. And when they were 6, both of them, 2-year gap, a child in their classroom said that they were going to now be identifying the opposite gender. And the second one was like gender fluid, so they switched from one to the other. In both incidences, we went into the school showing our concerns. And when it happened for a second time, and our second child had come home saying, "Look, I'm really confused." We thought, what do we do? And when the head teacher said that we just have to accept this, if a child wants to change gender, we just have to accept it, and they could lose their job if not. We were thinking, well, really, is that legal? And this is when we went and contacted Christian Concern, and then we sent a letter into the school. And it was the letter that we received back from the school, which was really shocking, which basically said our 6-year-old was transphobic if he did not believe this boy was a real female and did not use the right pronouns. And
so they actually said in the letter, in black and white, yes, your 6-year-old child is transphobic if he doesn't think this boy, and this boy was actually sometimes coming as a girl and sometimes as a boy, is that right?
That's right.
So if he doesn't think that on the days he comes in dressed as a girl, he's actually a girl, then he's transphobic.
Yeah, apparently.
I don't think the letter was really actually thought out well, to be honest with you. So I think that's what I think there was one part in the letter that said, even if you don't believe in the transgender ideologies, I'm paraphrasing here, then that is also a form of transphobic behaviour.
Just not believing, just disbelieving is transphobic.
Disbelieving it. So yeah, it's just ridiculous.
Wow. And that sounds completely shocking to us. And what was the reaction, from the wider school community to this kind of thing?
Well, there's a lot of silence, I think, by this time, because it's been so pushed, and so pushed it. I think there was no consultation to parents. So I think there was a lot of shock, but there was a lot of silence as well. I think, and I know from speaking to parents, some children came home quite upset or distressed and confused, like ours would, which is kind of, understandable. So, yeah, I think there's been a variety of responses, but most people don't talk about it because they're too scared to speak out and to question it.
But you two weren't cowed and weren't too scared, and you sort of took it further. So tell us what you did then.
Yeah. So having received the letter, I remember one of the lawyers saying this letter is not legally, ethically, or morally correct. And so they said, we really need to make a stand on this, because there are parents up and down the country who are also facing similar issues. The government can push this through the back door as law. We need to actually do something, but we can only do it if the parents make a stand and actually speak out. Nigel definitely was more, let's do this. I was really like, oh my goodness, we've just spent 4 years of building up really good relationships with the school. We do assemblies. We love these people. What's the right thing? So, but after praying and reading the word and fasting, realized actually this was really important for the sake of children across the country, that we needed to do something. We needed to speak out. And so from those convictions, we did.
Yeah. And one of the major issues was that the school is supposedly supposed to be a Church of England school. And for a Church of England school to start advocating some form of trans ideology, it was an anathema to me. And I thought, we can't let this happen, because otherwise it will just snowball. The next thing you know, it'll be throughout all the schools throughout the UK, and it will be normalised. It's a very dangerous road to go down.
And you did complain to the Church of England as well, did you not, about this?
I did. I phoned them. And I thought their response was shocking. Looking back, the response was, well, what you've got to remember, Nigel, is that they're Christian schools, but they're not faith schools. And I didn't understand exactly what he was saying. So, I think, well, if you have a school and it's represented by the Church of England, surely their doctrinal foundation is meant to be biblical. Of course, a biblical foundation is that God created them male and female. We have boys, we have girls. Marriages between a man and a woman. Those sort of
that shouldn't be controversial. It's not explicitly a Christian idea either, is it? It's not as if only Christians believe that we're made male and female.
No, it's not. But we should be, but we should be standing up for that. I mean, the church is meant to be the moral guide, if you like, for society, for the culture. But the church instead has just embraced these new strange narratives.
So, and because you didn't get anywhere with the school, or indeed with the diocese, you ended up deciding to pursue this as a legal case, didn't you? Against it's against the Department for Education, I think. Is that right? In the end.
Yes.
So just explain that to us then.
So, I mean, I know that we've the Christian legal team as well. We've been collating lots of expert evidence. It's taken a while because some people are scared to put their name to this because of fear of losing their job. But we have collated lots of expert evidence from psychologists and from the medical side who have been involved in children with gender dysphoria. And it's overwhelming. And this was submitted to the Department of Education, but they declined. They said, there's no case. And we're saying the guidelines that you're holding up as best practice, which is promoting this into schools, needs to change. It needs to be scrapped or changed at the least. And they wouldn't do anything. I mean, the letter to our school said the school does not require any formal medical or psychological assessment and reporting when a pupil seeks to be treated as transgendered or exploring their gender. So this is the kind of thing that schools have are saying now.
So there's no assessment. Yes. There's no doctor saying this or anything like that. There's nobody's. Basically, if a child comes in and says, "But now I'm a girl," that's it. Yeah. Now they're a girl. Was there?
Yeah, that's right. And yet the evidence says contrary to this. Dr. McHugh, Professor of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University, he's retired now, but he did years of working in the medical field, where he realised that after working with children and going through, they were going through surgery and things like that, it was doing more harm than good. They were still just as depressed or suicidal. And he says policies which affirm a child in their gender confusion without requiring psychological evidence are highly damaging to the children involved. And he's saying that leading experts in the area of psychiatry and pediatrics argue that abundant scientific evidence exists showing that transgender affirming policies do none of the children they are meant to serve any real or lasting good, that it harms the majority, the vast majority of them, and that it leads to catastrophic outcomes for many such afflicted children. So, and we feel like the government didn't really take this on board.
They
didn't even acknowledge it, really. Yeah, they kind of said no. So now it's gone, we submitted the papers to High Court after the Department of Education didn't take action. Yeah. It was rejected to begin with, but we had last week a review of that. Our barrister spoke in front of a different judge, and the judge realised, yes, this evidence hasn't really been taken proper consideration. So that is really, there's two reasons that this is going ahead. Is that one is what is education? What are we, what deems education, and to look at this evidence.
Yeah. So this is a fantastic step forward for you, isn't it? Because it's basically being given permission to judicial review the position of the Department of Education, isn't it? I keep getting confused for which body it is. And I noticed, by the way, we're posting up on Facebook and YouTube now links where you can read those expert reports from world-class experts in this whole subject of child psychology. They're lengthy reads, they're detailed reads, but they're well worth reading. And if you're commenting along on Facebook or YouTube, we can see it. If you've got any questions for Nigel and Sally, do put them up there. I can see Frederick Revel has said it's a bit like Little Boy Who Saw the Truth of the King's New Clothes. Well, it is a bit like that, isn't it? And various other people commenting sympathetically with your experience there, Nigel and Sally. Libby, so let's hear what your perspective is on this. Tell us a bit of your story as relevant and how you see this prospectively from your perspective.
So I sort of lived the transgender life for a few years of my life, and it's quite interesting that this is a perspective I don't often get the opportunity to give, but I discovered transgenderism when I was about 12 years old. And at the time we're talking like 2009, it wasn't in the media like it is now. It certainly wasn't on social media. It wasn't in schools as much as it is now. But it still sort of had quite a pull on me. And I remember I sort of had therapy with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service in my local area. And they sort of took what was called the wait and see approach, which essentially was, we can't tell this person that they're not transgender, but if they're really transgender, then they'll stay transgender. And that kind of like plants a seed in your head that you need to prove how much distress you're in, because otherwise you'll be seen as not having enough of an issue. I spent about 5 years in total kind of really deliberating over transition and whether I should transition, whether I could transition, until I was about 17 and I kind of gave in. But I know that if I'd been given that opportunity at the age of 12 to, take puberty blockers, to do the transition route, if that was accepted in my school and there was provision just given for that, if there were other kids in my school that were going down that route, I would have done it at the drop of a hat. It's sort of really strange because I was so sure of it, and I was actually one of those sort of minority of kids that doesn't grow out of it by the time that they're 18 and they've gone through puberty. I would have taken the puberty blockers. I would be probably infertile right now. I wouldn't be sort of looking at the future that I've got now with the idea of kind of starting a family one day and things like that. So it's quite horrifying actually to sort of see that there's sort of the idea of a 6-year-old being allowed to live in that way and sort of pursue those things without really understanding the perspective of what could change in the future.
So Libby, you're saying that you're pleased that when you were it would have been secondary school for you, there weren't, other children cross-dressing and identifying as transgender, because that would have encouraged you to do the same. And there wasn't this kind of allowance and acceptance of it in the way that there is now, or there was, 10 years or so later than this. And that therefore you would say, from your perspective, schools shouldn't allow, is this right? Children to cross-dress, change gender, re-identify, and that kind of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely not. It just provides this twisted view of how things work. And I think the most toxic thing that I was taught was that, oh, well, if you're really transgender, then this will be distressing you so much. It's sort of this atmosphere that doesn't allow a person to grow or change. So, would you do that with somebody who was depressed? Would you only give them therapy for depression if they stayed depressed for their whole life? Would you encourage them and tell them that their depression is completely immutable and they're not ever going to be able to escape it?
Yeah, and it's a bit like, or another sort of parallel would be anorexia, I assume, wouldn't it? Would you affirm someone's anorexic identity of how overweight they might feel themselves or whatever? No, you wouldn't. It's not helpful for them. And so in the same kind of way, you don't affirm somebody's transgender identity either, because that's also not good for them.
I think it's encouraging. Also, I think it's encouraging though to have someone like Libby Littlewood here, because she's a testimony of what has happened, and she's clearly someone who's able to go into school and say, well, this is exactly what happened to me, and explain the danger of this. Is I haven't gone through this sort of thing, or Sally hasn't, and someone like her can say, well, the kids need to hear this at school, because they don't hear that kind of perspective anymore. It's just this drip-fed narrative constantly within the media, specifically the BBC, and teachers and many staff and parents. They really believe it, but they don't hear the other side of the story, and that's what the children, or actually everyone in the school, needs to hear, the other side of the story when things go awry.
And I think so. I mean, I ended up being interviewed on this a few years ago, didn't I? I remember Nigel and Sally. I ended up saying, look, this is contrary to the law, because you can't change your gender legally until you're 18 anyway. It's contrary to B, theology, which is given at Church of England school, about being made of male and female, and it's contrary to C, the science, which says that you can't actually change your gender. Every single cell of your body is gendered, has gendered chromosomes in it. And so you just can't go ahead and change it. So it is. So I mean, summing that up, it's contrary to common sense, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and then we can go back to the science part. It's even irrational to teach little boys and girls that they can become the opposite sex at 6, because they don't even have a concept or understanding of what that is. Obviously, children know there is a gender. They see a boy and they see a girl, and the science is just overwhelming. As you just mentioned, you have XXXY. You have the human genome has male and female. In fact, we see it throughout nature as well, in everything. And then to make out to a child that they can change gender is just a lie, because you can never change the genome. You can never change that.
And so, to summarize what the expert witness reports are saying, I think there's probably 2 key facts, but you add to them. One is that 80 to 90% of kids grow out of this when they get through puberty, and they, nature sort of hits them and they grow out of it. Now, Libby is one of the exceptions here, but 80 to 90% grow out of it. And the other is that teaching and exposing this to kids generally is harmful for them, and it harms all the rest of the kids anyway.
Yeah, it does.
I think I think actually that statistic, the 80 to 90%, as far as I've read, it actually increases if you give the child affirmative therapy for their actual sex, and that's something that I know I wasn't offered, and I think that was, even in 2009, that was seen as taboo to sort of.
So just clarify what you mean, because people will get confused, Libby, about what you mean by affirmative, right?
Yeah. So because language doesn't mean anything anymore. No, it's so if I were given therapy to affirm myself as a woman, to teach me that, to empower me really, that I am able to be a woman regardless of how I feel or what my interests are or who I can relate to in school. Then there's actually a much higher rate, but that's taboo. You're not allowed, even increasingly now with recent legislation, you're not allowed to tell children, oh, actually, you are a little girl regardless of what you feel like you are.
Yes.
And so that was even the situation for you, 10 years ago plus or so. And here we are with the government proposing to criminalize conversion therapy, so-called, which in their definition, no under 18 can consent to talking therapy that may persuade them not to be transgender, which is exactly what you're saying is actually what would help these children, isn't it, Libby?
Yeah, it would solidify them in reality. I mean, kids need stability. That's a sort of unanimous fact. So why do we take it away from them in their gender?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's a fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah. So why do you think, Nigel and Sally, that the school and the government and the Church of England are sort of going down this route that's so contrary to science, theology, basic common sense, and the law as well? Why are they going down this route?
it's staggering, isn't it? The reason I believe is because the narrative is so strong. It's got to the point where everybody is too scared to stand against it. And I think within the church doctrine, they have forgotten that actually a committed Christian needs to stand on truth. And when you do stand on truth, people are offended. People get upset. If you tell people what they're doing is wrong, from a biblical perspective, you get very angry and it's uncomfortable. People want an easy life. We all want an easy life, really. But the truth is, if you want to stand on biblical values, stand on God's word, it's not going to be popular, especially in the secular world. So what has happened is the church has basically capitulated to these new trains of thought that are now coming into the culture. And that's the whole LGBT issues. There's other things, there's cultural Marxism, the whole Black Lives Matter thing, racism, environmentalism, all those things. And the voice is so loud in the media and it's constantly being peddled every day. It's kind of not, it's as though people are psychologically being brainwashed to the point that even the church has sucked it in, have been brainwashed. And now they just don't even, they don't really look at their Bibles and think, hang on a minute, the Bible's very clear of how we should be or what is the truth.
And it's to the point where they go as far as accusing a 6-year-old of transphobia for not affirming their friend's acquired gender, isn't it? I mean, Libby, what's your perspective on why schools and people are going down this route?
There probably are a million different reasons. I know when I was going through all of this when I was in high school, I think the US seemed to be a little bit further ahead in this. They already had sort of little boys dressing as little girls and going to school. I think it sort of perpetuates itself because we've gone from the sexual revolution, we've gone from feminism, and then we've managed to get sort of a hyper feminism that tells women that they're of no value unless they act like men, and men are of no value unless they act like women.
Yeah.
So a man being sensitive is the most virtuous thing he can be, and a woman being corporate is the most virtuous thing that she can do. So women having children has been devalued. We see that in abortion laws and things like that. Men having children and actually being responsible for them is devalued because women should just get the abortion. All these kind of things really do play together and they create that intricate web that means that a woman who wants to be sensitive is either going to be a conformist or she's going to be a man. And a man who wants to be a protector or wants to be strong is either going to be a misogynist and part of the patriarchy, or he can go and try and be a lesbian woman. Yeah.
And it's also this thing that it's kind of like we've made ourselves gods, haven't we? Because we can define who we are. And so I define what my gender is and I define what my identity is and all this kind of stuff. And it doesn't matter if it's contrary to science or whatever it is. I'm the one who makes up who I am. And it's kind of making ourselves into God, isn't it? Rather than actually submitting to the fact that we're created and we can't just define exactly who we are, even though we do have free will. So Nigel and Sally, listen, you've just been given last week permission to take this to court. How's the reaction been to that news? It's quite a big story that the government is going to be challenged about this, and they're going to have to hear and listen to the evidence about it.
Yeah,
positive.
We've been very, very pleasantly surprised about how many people are really supporting this, and I think the tide is turning. I mean, we did know that a lot of people agreed with us when we first made the stand, but weren't speaking out. I think more and more people are now speaking out and are quite happy to vocalise that now, if it's just writing comments on social media. But so we've been really encouraged.
I think the devil has overplayed his hand in the school system, and I think the public are beginning to see it. Here on the island, I know that there's a school in Cowes. You go in there and it's sort of the LGBT flag is up there, and the staff are wearing the LGBT lanyards and things like that, and it's kind of just overwhelming. And I remember a fellow couch-surfing friend of mine, he went to check out the school and he came back and said to me, he said, "No, that's all we see. It's clearly a partisan ideology just being pushed." and they see it, and I think people are frustrated with it, because ultimately when people send their children to school, they want them just to learn math, science, English, all those things. They don't want them to be indoctrinated with these other ideologies. And we get this sort of stuff now in everything, even in sport. You know, in sport it becomes political. You can't just think about sport. There's a political narrative that goes with it. It's in everything, and I think people are sick and tired of it.
And there's been quite a lot of media interest, hasn't there, as well, in your case?
Yeah.
Excuse me. You've had a number of interviews, a number of newspaper and other media reports.
Yeah, we have. I mean, all of them have been very. The impression I get is they're on our side. LBC, well, they're very lefty, aren't they? And where the title I saw up there was transphobic. How they did it? It was something about transphobia, and I just thought, oh, there we go. You know, what you do is you try to demonize people like us and put on their, you know, they're transphobic or homophobic,
But quite a lot of headlines were talking about this aspect that we're talking about today, which is, can a 6-year-old really be accused of being transphobic when their friend changes gender? I mean, you know, that when you put it like that, most people, you know, in spite of whatever indoctrination or media indoctrination they may have had, will say, "Oh, come on, hang on a minute, you know, surely that's not right."
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think there has been a sense of, surely this is not right, that's come out of this news this week. And it's interesting that you think there's been more support than presumably when you first came out about this about 4 years ago. And
for sure, definitely. Yeah, there has been a change.
And also, I think it's because a lot of people have actually having first-hand experience of this now with their children in school. It's just, as we know, it's gone up 3,000%. In terms of referrals to the gender clinic, but I think
10 years, isn't it? That's in 10 years' time.
Teenage girls there's a massive number of people that we know who are that they're so confused. They're like, oh, am I bisexual? Am I trans? That, you know, it's just they're actually there's a massive confusion and depression rate. People don't know what their true identity is. And this is because it's been peddled for so long, and so I think people are getting sick and tired of it, and really concerned for their own children.
It's contagion. It's like a fad. You know, I remember when we were at school, you'll get the fad. I remember at school we had the yo-yo fad, and sort of fad. So the latest fad is, you know, I mean, I'm a gas engineer. I go to people's homes. I remember talking to one of my customers saying, you know, they had a real issue at the school where, because their daughter said she was being bullied at school because the other girls said that they were pansexual, whatever that sort of means, and she said, well, actually, no, I like boys. And I think she was the age of 12, thinking, why are these sort of conversations being, you know, happening in a school environment? So it's like a contagion, and it's a fad.
Well, and I want to bring Libby back in on this as well, because Libby, you know, you said that had other people been going down the street, you would have probably joined them as well. But what's your perspective, Libby? Do you think that the tide has turned a bit on this whole transgender thing at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's been gradual, but definitely nowadays it's become a sort of a virtue. It's become, I know that even when I was kind of in that sort of ideology as a teenager, I remember kind of seeing all these kind of sexualities presented in front of me, seeing pansexuality as the altruistic sexuality because you're not judging people. Seeing, you know, all of these different labels that I sort of had to attach to myself. And I think the more that kind of seeps into what kids are doing, the more that they kind of feel that they have to. They feel sort of forced into being transgender or having some kind of alternative sexuality because, like I said, they're either misogynistic or they're conformist, or they're brainwashed by the church, ironically. And kids always, every single generation of kids and teenagers wants to carve out their own identity, wants to become an individual and wants to showcase who they are. And the medium by which that's kind of happening right now, which is encouraged by the relationships and sex education, where they're shown the gender unicorn with its different, you know, gender and sexuality and romantic and sexual attraction. You know, they're seeing that as the way that they are meant to carve out their identity. in a way that they can sort of be individuals, but also play within the safe rules that are outlined by adults. And so that's something that's absolutely terrifying. At least when I was younger, we didn't have such overt kind of in school, the relationships education wasn't like that.
Yeah. And so, and of course, Stonewall has also been part of this sort of trend, hasn't it? They went and pushed transgenderism so hard that having sort of got almost a stranglehold on, you know, huge numbers of corporations and organizations, a lot of them have backed down, including government organizations as well, out of their champion scheme because of their push on transgenders. So it does feel like the whole transgender agenda is starting to lose its way. And certainly we hope, Nigel and Sally, that your case actually, you know, ends up causing a change in public policy. I mean, it should be that, you know, girls are girls and boys are boys, and leave them like that. And they should come to uniform and comply with school uniform on that, and not just come and change on the whim of whatever day they feel like. I mean, that's obviously not how it should work. We're getting some encouraging comments in here on Donald Bryce on YouTube says, I saw Libby's testimony on Tough Talk and Lord's using her, and strength to Nigel and Sally Rowe and Libby. Well done. And various others as well commenting on a great fight that you're doing. Great work, good fight. Approaches similar to any totalitarian takeover, same in Germany in the 1930s or communist countries, where cults be Bonhoeffer a great thing. Well, it is, in a sense, totalitarian as well, isn't it? So, Libby, what would be your advice to parents or teachers today who may be facing this issue in the classroom? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's incredibly difficult. I mean, personally, I'm planning on homeschooling my children because there's just so much going out there. But I think there really is a big
so you've
fight.
Decided that, just to be clear, it's interesting to know, Libby, because you haven't got children yet, right? Yeah, I mean, you're just you're getting married later this year, I understand, which is fantastic news. But you've decided with your husband, have you, that you're going to have to homeschool because of this?
Yeah. My fiance and I have actually discussed a lot about we wouldn't want to put our children in the danger of the trajectory that schools are going in with this kind of stuff, especially with myself having struggled with this.
Right.
You know, we do know that there are some biological components that can be encouraged by the environment when it comes to. So, you know, if I have interests in playing video games or I'm more logically minded, then what's the chances that my daughter might be? And therefore, what's the chance that she might end up being pushed into that trajectory? But I do see that there is a huge, you know, it's imperative that schools actually try and get a hold of this where it's at. And I think I would be terrified of being a teacher in this kind of climate, because I'd never be able to go against my biblical convictions, and I would probably lose my job, to be fair. But I think it's important to kind of, you might be that one teacher or that one adult in a child's life who affirms the gender that they really are. You know, you don't have to overtly sort of be mean about it or anything, but even if you're just sort of open there for that child to say, oh, I'm not really sure that, you know, this transgender thing that we've been taught in school, does this mean I'm a boy or a girl? Being that one teacher or that one parent that sort of sits there and says, actually, maybe you just need to be you, and your body doesn't need to be changed, and your pronouns don't need to be changed. I mean, just even with the lanyards, these LGBT lanyards, just one small protest of go in and wear a bright purple lanyard instead of the LGBT one, or, you know, something very, very covert, something in the school colours. And you know,
it shouldn't really require courage to say.
We could go into schools with the Christian flag, couldn't we? The Christian lanyard. You know,
it's a kind of extraordinary situation, isn't it? It shouldn't really require courage to say boys are boys and girls are girls.
No,
and that's the way it is, you know. And yet somehow we've gotten to this position in society where it requires courage to say what is obvious, that, you know, boys should be boys and girls should be girls, and they should be kept distinct, and that you can't just change from one to the other overnight and change back again the next day either, which is what was happening in your son's school, isn't it?
Yeah. Ironically, you know, I mean, a lot of my upbringing was in Africa, and you know, to them it's just anathema. If you know, I remember I went back to Kenya a couple of years ago, and I remember talking to the taxi driver who was taking us to the house, and I was telling him what was going on, and he just couldn't get his head around it, that in the West that we were teaching boys could become girls and girls could become boys. And I think it's also the same in the Eastern Bloc countries. You know, when we were interviewed by RT, Russia Today, you can see that when we were in Hungary, I remember the translator, she had to confirm with me at the end of the when she was translating for us as we were speaking. She said, and she asked the question, so are you actually saying in the West that they're saying boys can become girls or girls can become boys? And I said, yes. And they were just this. So their reaction was, they were shocked. And they said, this is madness. And it really is madness. But the West, in its arrogance, thinks that it's progressed. But actually, we're regressing.
It's the wrong side of history, rather than the right side of history. And you've ended up being forced to homeschool your children, haven't you? How's that been for you, Nigel and Sally?
It's actually been very positive.
Wonderful.
And we're part of a good community, home ed community called Classical Conversation. So the boys are very happy. God has turned it all for good, as he does. So yeah, it has been a very positive experience.
And our boys aren't indoctrinated with, you know, sort of the lefty stuff that's peddled pretty much every day, and it's wonderful. You know, they're just boys being boys, going out on their mountain bikes and windsurfing and so on and so forth. They're just loving life and, you know, having a good education.
They're much happier than they were.
Oh,
much happier. I mean, I remember them fighting to go to school. They didn't want to go. I mean, that's when the alarm bell started ringing too. You're thinking, well, what is it about school you dislike so much that they're miserable and they're coming home and they're not happy? Thinking, well, what's going on? Why is that? And of course, I think one of the things, and you know, is that as Christian parents, you teach your children at home a biblical ethic to life. And so therefore, when they go to school, all of a sudden they're hearing things that they're not used to hearing. And so it's saying, well, mum and dad are saying, for example, you know, marriage is between a man and a woman. And I go to school and they're saying that boys can marry boys or girls can marry girls. And they come home and say, Daddy, can they? And I said, no, by definition, you know, marriage is between a man and a woman. So that they hear this, and it's very confusing for children. And also, I think it's stressful because all the other kids, you know, they do start having these conversations. They're saying, oh, you know, I'm not mentioning my son's name, but did you know that a boy can marry a boy? And he was just, what? He couldn't work it out. He couldn't work it out because he sees mummy and daddy at home. And as for you, Libby, I would really encourage you. Homeschooling is great, especially if you can join a Christian organisation like Classical Conversations. It's brilliant.
You've given me a lot of hope with that. I'm definitely going to be in touch with you guys when it sort of comes to working out the logistics of that. So that's really great.
We'd be glad to support you.
Yeah. Very welcome.
Well, listen, Nigel and Sally, we're so proud of you, and thank you for being the bold, brave ones who are standing up. And there's loads of us behind you, and lots of people commenting saying they're so glad at what you're doing, and you're speaking up for the 99% and this kind of thing out there. And I'm so pleased as well that you feel there's more support generally in the culture today than there was 4 years ago when you first came out with this story. And we will pray that your case succeeds and the government policy changes on this to something more in line with common sense. And thank you, Libby, for joining us, and your wisdom and expertise on this subject really greatly valued in your experience as well. So valuable. And thank you for joining us. If you've been watching live or if you're listening again, lovely to hear you and hear from you. And we'll be here again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.